Everyone thought my sister was helping me until she called security on me for asking to withdraw $100. I'm Jessica, and what happened at First National Bank that Tuesday morning changed everything between my sister Sarah and me forever. But to understand why those words, "We don't serve beggars here," cut so deep, you need to know our story. Growing up in the Morrison household meant living in Sarah's shadow. She was 3 years older, blonde, where I was brunette, outgoing where I was quiet, and, according to our parents, destined for greatness while I was just there. Mum would beam whenever Sarah brought home her straight A's, throwing elaborate celebration dinners. When I brought home the same grades, it was met with simple, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation shifted back to Sarah's latest achievement. The pattern started early. Sarah's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with ponies and magicians. Mine were quiet family dinners, where Sarah somehow still managed to be the centre of attention, charming the relatives with her latest piano recital stories or debate team victories. By the time I turned 16, I'd stopped expecting much. It was easier that way. The real breaking point came during my high school graduation. I'd worked my ass off to become valedictorian, something Sarah had never achieved. For once, I thought, this would be my moment. The morning of graduation, Mum was frantically preparing for the party afterward. I walked into the kitchen expecting excitement, maybe some acknowledgement of my accomplishment. Instead, I found Mom on the phone with the caterer, stressed about the guest list. "I know it's Jessica's graduation," she was saying, "but Sarah just got engaged last night. We can't not celebrate that too. Can you make it an engagement party as well?" That's when I understood. Even my biggest achievement would be shared, overshadowed by Sarah's life events. I wasn't the golden child. I was the background character in Sarah's story. After college, while Sarah climbed the corporate ladder at First National Bank, I quietly built my own path. I started small, a consulting firm focused on international acquisitions. No fanfare, no family investment, no borrowed connections from Dad's golf buddies. Just me, my laptop, and an unhealthy amount of determination to prove I was worth something. The family dinners became exercises in endurance. Sarah would regale everyone with stories of her promotions, her corner office, her team of 30 employees. "Branch manager before 30, Dad would boast to anyone who'd listen. When they asked about my work, I'd mention a successful merger or a new client, only to watch their eyes glaze over. "That's nice, dear," Mum would say, before turning back to Sarah. "Tell us more about the new banking regulations you're implementing." Sarah loved those moments. I could see it in the way her smile stretched a little wider, how she'd lean back in her chair with that satisfied look. She'd worked hard to become the family success story, and my quiet achievements didn't threaten that narrative. In her mind, I was still the little sister who needed guidance, who'd eventually come to her for help when my little business inevitably failed. What she didn't know was that Morrison International had grown beyond anything our family could imagine. The consulting firm had evolved into something much larger. We facilitated multi-billion-dollar acquisitions across 3 continents. I'd kept my personal life separate from my professional success, using my middle name, Elizabeth, in all business dealings. To my family, I was still just Jessica, the quiet one who did something with computers. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Sarah managed one branch of a regional bank, I was orchestrating transactions that dwarfed their institution's entire market cap. But I never corrected the family's assumptions. There was something peaceful about being underestimated. No pressure, no expectations, no disappointment when I couldn't live up to someone else's version of success. That Tuesday morning, I needed to close an old checking account I'd opened in college, a small account with maybe $200 left in it. I could have handled it online or over the phone, but I was in the area for another meeting and figured I'd take care of it in person. Simple enough. The moment I walked into First National, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach that came with entering Sarah's domain. The bank was impressive. Marble floors, high ceilings, that particular smell of money and air conditioning that expensive institutions seem to cultivate. Sarah had done well for herself here. I approached the main counter where a young teller was helping another customer. The line moved slowly, giving me time to look around. Through the glass office in the back, I could see Sarah at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her navy blue suit immaculate. She looked successful, confident, in control, everything our parents had always said she would be. When it was finally my turn, I smiled at the teller, a young guy who looked like he was maybe 22, still eager to please. "Hi, I need to close a checking account and withdraw the remaining balance." He pulled up my account on his computer, and I watched his expression change. His helpful smile faltered slightly as he looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen. The balance shows $187.32. You want to withdraw all of it?" "Yes, please. I'm closing the account." Something in his tone must have carried across the banking floor because I noticed a few other customers glancing our way. The teller hesitated, then excused himself and walked toward the back offices. Through the glass, I could see him talking to Sarah, gesturing toward me. That's when our eyes met for the first time in 6 months. Sarah looked up from her conversation with the teller, and I watched her face go through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, she hadn't expected to see me. Confusion, what was I doing at her bank? And then something else, something that looked almost like embarrassment. She stood up from her desk, smoothed her skirt, and walked out to the main floor with the purposeful stride of someone who owned the space. Every eye in the bank followed her. She commanded that kind of attention effortlessly, the same magnetic presence that had captivated our parents, our teachers, everyone we'd ever met. "Is there a problem here?" she asked the teller, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority she'd perfected over the years. Professional, but with an edge that suggested she was already annoyed. The teller glanced between us nervously. "The customer wants to withdraw her entire balance and close the account. It's just, well, it's $187. I felt heat creep up my neck. The way he said it, like 180 cents, was somehow suspicious, like I was trying to pull some kind of scam. Around us, other customers were starting to stare more openly. The bank had gone quieter, conversations dropping to whispers as people sensed drama unfolding. Sarah looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker across her face. For just a moment, I thought she might acknowledge me, might handle this with the family connection that should have existed between us. Instead, her expression hardened. "Ma'am," she said, addressing me with the cold politeness reserved for difficult customers, Is there a specific reason you need to withdraw such a modest amount in cash today? The words hit me like a slap, not just the question, but the way she asked it, the slight emphasis on modest, the way she positioned herself between me and the teller as if I was some kind of threat. The fact that she was treating me like a stranger, no, worse than a stranger, she was treating me like a problem. It's my account, I said quietly. I just want to close it and take what's mine. I understand that, Sarah replied, her voice getting louder, more pointed. But frankly, coming in here demanding cash withdrawals for small amounts, it raises questions. We have policies about suspicious transactions. The bank had gone completely quiet now. Every customer, every teller, every person in that space was watching this play out. I could feel their stares, their judgment, their curiosity about what kind of person gets interrogated for trying to withdraw less than $200 from their own account. Suspicious? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah crossed her arms, and in that gesture I saw every family dinner where she dismissed my opinions, every Christmas morning where my gifts were overshadowed by hers, every moment of my life where I'd been made to feel like I didn't quite measure up. Look, she said, and now her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. We don't serve beggars here. If you're having financial difficulties, there are social services that can help you. But don't come into my bank acting like you're entitled to special treatment. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Beggars. She'd called me a beggar in front of everyone. In front of her employees, her customers, strangers who would go home tonight and tell their families about the woman who got called a beggar at the bank. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break exactly, but crack, like ice forming on a window, creating patterns that would never quite go away. This wasn't just professional dismissal. This was Sarah, my sister, looking at me and seeing someone worth nothing. Someone who didn't deserve basic human dignity, let alone family loyalty. The security guard started walking toward us, a big guy in a navy uniform with a radio clipped to his shoulder, moving with the slow confidence of someone who'd done this before. Behind the teller counter, employees were whispering, stealing glances at the scene unfolding. "Ma'am," the security guard said, "is there a problem here?" Sarah nodded toward me. "She's being disruptive about a small withdrawal. I think it's best if she handles her banking elsewhere." That was it. I was being asked to leave. Not just asked, escorted. In front of all these people, I was being treated like I'd done something wrong, like wanting access to my own money was somehow criminal. But as the security guard stepped closer, something interesting happened. My phone rang. The ringtone cut through the tense silence of the bank. A sharp, professional sound that seemed out of place in this humiliating moment. I looked down at the screen and saw a number I recognized. My assistant calling about the European acquisition we'd been working on for months. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Just taking the humiliation, walking away, letting Sarah have her moment of superiority, it would be easier. It would be what everyone expected from me. Instead, I answered, "Jessica Morrison speaking." And just like that, something shifted in the air around us. The voice on the other end was crisp, urgent. Ms. Morrison, I'm sorry to bother you, but we need your immediate authorization for the wire transfer to complete the Heidelberg acquisition. The German banks are requesting confirmation of funds before close of business their time. I felt myself straightening, my voice automatically shifting into the tone I used for international business calls: professional, authoritative. The voice of someone who had been making decisions that affected thousands of jobs and billions of dollars for years. What's the total amount we need to transfer? 3.5 billion as discussed, but they need confirmation that the funds are available and ready for immediate transfer. Around me, the bank had gone quiet again, but this time it was different. This time people were listening, not because they were watching a spectacle, but because something in my voice had commanded their attention. Sarah was staring at me now, her confident expression replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. The security guard had stopped moving toward me, uncertain about whether he was still needed. I'll need to handle that immediately, I said into the phone. I'm at a bank right now, actually. Let me call you back in 5 minutes once I've arranged the transfer. I hung up and looked around the suddenly silent banking floor. Every eye was on me, but the energy had completely changed. Where moments before I'd been the disruptive customer causing problems over $187, now I was someone who casually discussed moving $3.5 billion. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw me. I felt it too, the familiar confidence that came with operating in my professional world, the authority that came with years of success that my family had never bothered to learn about. I looked directly at Sarah, who was still staring at me with that confused expression, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the marble floor, I think I might need to handle a slightly larger transaction today after all. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sarah's mouth had opened slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. The security guard looked between us, clearly unsure whether he should continue with his original mission of escorting me out or step back and wait to see what would unfold. I walked calmly toward the main customer service desk, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing in the unnaturally quiet space. The young teller who had originally tried to help me was still standing behind the counter, his eyes wide with the kind of fascination people get when they realize they're witnessing something extraordinary. I need to speak with senior management about executing a large wire transfer, I said, my voice carrying the same professional tone I'd used on the phone. $3.5 billion to be precise. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Did she just say billion?" and watched the teller's face go through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Sarah recovered first, stepping forward with a laugh that sounded forced and brittle. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "I need to wire $3.5 billion to complete an international acquisition," I repeated, looking directly at her. "I assume this branch can handle that level of transaction?" The question was pointed, professional, and absolutely devastating, because we both knew that First National was a solid regional bank, but they'd never handled a transaction of that magnitude. The entire bank's market cap was maybe half that amount. Sarah's face had gone pale, but she was still trying to maintain her authority. "Mum, I think you might be confused about..." "About what?" I interrupted, and for the first time there was steel in my voice. "About my own financial capabilities. About what I'm authorised to do with my own money." I pulled out my phone and called my assistant back. The conversation was brief, professional, and conducted at a volume that carried clearly across the banking floor. "Amanda, I'm at First National Bank on 5th Street. I need you to send over my account verification documents and authorization codes for the Heidelberg transfer. Yes, all of it, the full 3.5 billion. They'll need proof of funds before they can execute the transfer." When I hung up, the bank was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. Everyone was staring. Customers, employees, even people walking by outside seemed to have slowed down to peer through the windows. Sarah was looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The confident, dismissive expression she'd worn when calling me a beggar had been replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Jessica," she said quietly, and for the first time she used my name. "What exactly do you do for work?" Before I could answer, the bank's phone started ringing. Not just one line, multiple phones throughout the branch began lighting up simultaneously. The main receptionist answered first, her voice professional but increasingly strained as the conversation progressed. "First National Bank. Yes, we have a Jessica Morrison here. You're calling from Morrison International's corporate office. You need to verify what amount." She looked up from her call, her face pale, and caught Sarah's eye. Sarah hurried over to take the phone, and I watched her expression change as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "This is Sarah Chen, branch manager. Yes, she's here. 3.5 what? Are you absolutely certain about that figure?" While Sarah was on the phone, another line rang, then another. The young teller picked up one of the calls, and I could hear fragments of similar conversations happening throughout the branch. Account verification requests, authorization confirmations, transfer approval protocols for an amount that was apparently causing quite a stir in their system. The security guard had quietly moved to the side, no longer looking like he was planning to escort me anywhere. Instead, he was watching the unfolding scene with the same fascinated attention as everyone else. Sarah finished her phone call and walked back toward me slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure was dangerous or not. Her professional composure was cracking around the edges. "That was your corporate office," she said, her voice uncertain. "They're saying you need to authorize a wire transfer for, they're saying the amount is $3.5 billion, I finished for her. Yes, that's correct. But that's..." Sarah shook her head, as if she could somehow make the numbers make sense through physical movement. "That's not possible. You were just trying to withdraw $187. "I was trying to close an old personal account," I corrected. "The business account is separate." Around us, I could see other customers starting to pull out their phones. Some were clearly texting friends about what they were witnessing. Others looked like they were taking pictures or videos. In the social media age, extraordinary moments didn't stay private for long. Another phone rang, and this time it was answered by an older man in an expensive suit who had emerged from one of the back offices. I recognized him from the bank's website. The regional vice president, or maybe the district manager. Someone higher up the food chain than Sarah. He spoke briefly, hung up, and walked directly toward our small group. His expression was the kind of carefully neutral professionalism that people in banking use when they're not entirely sure what they're dealing with, but know it's important. "Ms. Morrison," he said, extending his hand toward me. "I'm Robert Hayes, Regional Director for First National. I understand you need to execute a large wire transfer." The introduction was smooth, polished, and completely ignored Sarah's presence. In the space of 5 minutes, I'd gone from being a disruptive customer she was having removed to someone important enough to bring out regional management. Sarah was staring between Mr. Hayes and me, and I could see her trying to process what was happening. The sister she'd dismissed as a failure. The woman she'd just called a beggar in front of a room full of people was suddenly being treated with the kind of deference reserved for the bank's most important clients. "Yes," I replied, shaking his hand. "I need to authorize a transfer to complete an international acquisition. The amount is $3.5 billion. Mr. Hayes nodded as if people requested billion-dollar transfers in his lobby every day. "Of course, we'll need to move to a private office to handle the verification and authorization process. If you'll follow me?" He gestured towards the back of the bank, toward the executive offices where the real business happened. As we started walking, he glanced back at Sarah. "Ms. Chen, perhaps you could join us? You'll want to observe how we handle these larger transactions for future reference." It wasn't really a suggestion. Sarah fell into step behind us, and I could practically feel the confusion radiating off her. Behind us, the main banking floor was still unnaturally quiet, everyone watching our small procession toward the back offices. The executive conference room was impressive. Mahogany table, leather chairs, walls lined with awards and certificates. Mr. Hayes gestured for me to take a seat at the head of the table, while Sarah sat to one side, looking like she was attending a meeting she didn't understand. "Now then," Mr. Hayes said, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd handled many large transactions. "I have to admit, Ms. Morrison, this is the largest single transfer request we've received at this branch. Can you help me understand the nature of the transaction?" "International acquisition," I replied. "Morrison International is purchasing a German manufacturing conglomerate. The deal has been in negotiation for 8 months, and we need to complete the transfer today to meet the European banking deadlines." Sarah made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, but close. She was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. "Morrison International," Mr. Hayes repeated, and I could see recognition dawning in his expression. "The consulting firm that handled the Yamamoto-Peterson merger last year?" "Among others," I confirmed. He leaned back in his chair, and his entire demeanour shifted. Where before he'd been professionally cautious, now he looked genuinely impressed. "I read about that deal in the Financial Times. Brilliant work, absolutely brilliant. The way you structured the cross-border tax implications was, well, it was masterful." Sarah was looking between us like we were speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Jessica, what is Morrison International?" Mr. Hayes looked surprised by the question. "Ms. Chen, Morrison International is one of the most prestigious acquisition consulting firms in the world. They facilitated some of the largest corporate mergers of the past decade. He turned back to me. I had no idea you had connections to the area, Ms. Morrison. We would have certainly handled your banking needs differently if we'd known. I don't have connections to the area, I said quietly. I grew up here. The statement was simple, factual, and absolutely devastating. Because it meant that Sarah, the branch manager of this bank, the golden child who was supposed to know everything about everyone important in the business community, had been completely unaware that one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region was her own sister. Sarah's face had gone white. You grew up here, she repeated slowly. But that means your sister, I finished. Yes. Mr. Hayes looked between us, clearly realizing he'd walked into something much more complicated than a simple wire transfer. I see. Well, this is certainly an interesting situation. The understatement of the century. Mr. Hayes, I said, bringing the conversation back to business, I need to complete this transfer today. What do you need from me to make that happen? He cleared his throat, obviously grateful to return to familiar professional territory. Well, for a transaction of this magnitude, we'll need several layers of verification, account authentication, multiple authorization codes, possibly approval from our head office. Of course, I pulled out my phone and began making calls. For the next 20 minutes, the conference room became the center of a financial verification process that was unlike anything First National had ever handled. Phone calls to corporate offices in 3 countries. Digital authorization codes sent to secure terminals. Bank officials from the head office joining by video conference to personally verify the transaction. Through it all, Sarah sat in stunned silence, watching me navigate international banking protocols with the ease of someone who did this regularly, which of course I did. The final verification came from the head of international banking at First National's corporate headquarters, a woman who clearly knew me by reputation and seemed almost excited to be handling the transaction. Ms. Morrison, she said through the video conference connection, it's an honour to facilitate this transfer for Morrison International. We've been hoping to develop a relationship with your firm for some time. Thank you, I replied. I appreciate the professionalism your team has shown today. When all the authorizations were complete and the transfer was officially in process, Mr. Hayes leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who just completed the largest transaction of his career. $3.5 billion, he said, shaking his head slightly. Ms. Morrison, this is the largest single transfer in this bank's history by a considerable margin. Sarah was still staring at me, but her expression had changed completely. The dismissive confidence was gone. The professional authority had evaporated. She looked like someone who'd just realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake but didn't know how to fix it. Jessica, she said finally, her voice small and uncertain, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you had some kind of consulting business, but I thought it was small. I thought You thought I was a failure, I said quietly. You thought I was the same little sister who never measured up, who would always need help, who would never amount to anything important. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I never said You didn't need to say it, I replied. It was in every family dinner conversation that got redirected away from my work. Every time Mum and Dad bragged about your promotions while barely acknowledging my business. Every Christmas where my success was treated as somehow less important than yours. Mr. Hayes was looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly realizing he was witnessing a very personal family confrontation. But there was nowhere for him to go. We were in his conference room and the transaction wasn't quite complete. Sarah's eyes were starting to fill with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of regret or tears of embarrassment. Maybe both. And today, I continued, my voice still quiet but carrying clearly in the small room, when I came into your bank as a customer requesting a simple transaction, you saw someone you didn't recognize and decided I was a beggar. Someone who didn't deserve basic respect, let alone basic service. I didn't know it was you, she whispered. Exactly, I said. You didn't know it was me, but you felt completely comfortable treating a stranger that way. You felt justified calling someone a beggar in front of a room full of people. You felt good about having security remove someone whose only crime was trying to access their own money. The words hung in the air between us. Mr. Hayes was studying his hands, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Outside the conference room, I could see bank employees moving around, trying to look busy, while obviously hoping to catch glimpses of whatever was happening in the room where the $3.5 billion transfer had just taken place. Sarah stood up suddenly, pushing back from the table. For a moment, I thought she was going to walk out, to end the conversation before it could get any more painful. Instead, she did something I never expected. She dropped to her knees.